Your opponents don't know the bishop's opening yet, but they're about to learn it the hard way. What's up guys, I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and today I'm going to walk you through my favorite bishop's opening. Now, this is far less common compared to the mainstream move knight to f3, but at the same time, the bishop's opening is solid, it is aggressive, we're targeting the weakest point of your opponent's position, plus we catch your opponents off guard, and there are a number of tricks all along the way. On top of that, you're gonna know everything that you need about the bishop's opening today, unlike your opponents. Now, after bishop c4, the two most common moves by far that your opponents are going to be choosing, either knight to f6 or knight to c6, and we'll talk about them both. Starting from the most popular knight f6, they're trying to attack your opponent. But here, they're about to experience the very first surprise. Instead of defending this pawn anyhow, we counter-strike in the center with this move pawn to d4. Now, at this point, your opponent is at the crossroad. They can either capture this pawn or this one. And one of these two moves is a pretty significant mistake, which already puts them in a very dangerous spot. Can you guess which move is right? If it's not obvious, that's great, because it means that your opponents will have a hard time figuring out the right one. Now, spoiler, the right one is capturing this pawn on d4. However, certainly many of them will decide to pick this one as they attacked it on their previous move, and now it seems logical to just continue with this capture. In this case, we're going to capture right here on e5, and this is the problem that your opponents did not expect. This knight on e4 is actually kind of shaky, and we're about to attack it. Moreover, our pawn from e5 cuts off these squares where the knight could possibly retreat to, making the position very vulnerable to our attacks. Another nice fact about this position is that, although you already have pretty decent advantage, but the three most common moves of black are losing the game on the spot, like bishop c5, pawn to d5, and knight to c6 are three of the most popular moves, and they all lose basically right there within the next two moves. Again, that just goes to show you that the bishop's opening, although unknown, but is much trickier than most of your opponents think. Now, let's begin with bishop to c5. Looks like a tempting option as they team up against this pawn on f2. And once again, they expect you to try to defend it somehow, but instead, we still counterattack. And the move is queen to d5. In fact, that was your major threat prior to them playing bishop to c5. They just overlooked this idea overall. And by putting the bishop to c5, they rather reinforced your own threat. Now, the point behind queen to d5 is that we line up against this pawn on f7, threatening something like scholar's checkmate. On top of that, we're also attacking this knight on e4 with our queen, and now they were gentle enough to put the bishop to add the third piece for our attack, and which makes it completely defenseless for black. They can have this final check, but that doesn't change the situation too much, as after the king moves, they are still facing the very same problem. They need to guard this pawn, as well as the knight, and now the bishop on f2 is also hanging. Now, of course, primarily, they need to guard the king, therefore they castle, and now we pick up this knight on e4, and we are up a piece. Plus, this bishop on f2 is attacked. They'll usually drop it back, and at this point, it feels like they may have a little compensation because your king was exposed. But the reality is actually the opposite. Not only you're up a piece, but you are the one attacking. Like, you have more space, more activity, your pieces can easily jump out and start attacking him. Anyhow, the bishop can go here and attack. You have more space and more activity, basically. I'll show an example line. Of course, you don't have to remember it. It just goes to show how you can finish it off from here. c6 is the most popular move. I'm not really sure why. I guess they're trying to prepare a pawn d5 break, but it's not going to happen. After this, you can already play bishop d3 and threaten checkmate on h7. Forcing them to weaken their king, but now all these dark squares around their king are terribly weak, and we can now play bishop g5, basically finishing it off straight away. The queen has to move, and now we can play queen h4, trying to put together this simple checkmate, but black is defenseless anyways. After they go d5, you play bishop to f6, trying to play queen h6 to g7, and if they go pawn to h5, let this be our puzzle of the day, by the way. Of course, white is winning here easily, and probably there are multiple ways to do that, but there is only one checkmate in 4 moves, and your task is to find it and to write it down in comments below. The second most common move by black here is a surprisingly popular blunder pawn to d5. They are hoping to push your bishop away, but they're just overlooking the fact that besides the bishop, you've got this queen standing right here from d1 and also targeting this pawn. Therefore, that is just a straightforward blunder. You can grab the pawn and attack the knight, forcing it to go. Moreover, after the knight goes, There is one more unpleasant surprise for black. You now play bishop takes f7, completely destroying their position and winning the queen. They have to move the king away, but after that, we're about to win the queen. But they're defenseless. Even if they try to hold on to the queen, we just add another bishop to our attack, and thanks to this skewer, we finish it off, and we win the game. There is also one more common tactical motif. For example, if they go knight to c6. You could play queen to d5, similar to the main line, but on top of that there is also this bishop takes f7 check, another thing which your opponents overlooked. This is a temporary sacrifice because in the next move we continue with queen d5, therefore we're going to get our piece back with interest. Now we're up a pawn, plus we won this really important pawn on f7 that used to cover their king. Moreover, their king had to move back and forth, meaning it lost the right to castle, it cannot castle kingside or queenside in this game, it's gonna stay right there in the middle of the board, and after that you just continue your development, and you have a total domination. That goes to show that knight takes e4 was wrong, and in most cases you're going to win within the next couple moves. The correct move by black is pawn takes d4, and now there is an important nuance. We're not going to get this pawn back straight away, because then they can develop their knight and gain a tempo attacking our queen. That is why instead we'll do something smarter. We're going to develop this knight to f3, and at this point most of your opponents will be tempted to capture this pawn on e4, first of all because it looks like a free pawn, and secondly because they're annoyed by the fact that otherwise you can push the pawn forward and kick their knight away. Therefore, they now capture this pawn on e4, and they hope that now they're having a great position. They dream about playing d5, shutting down your bishop, solidifying the knight. They think life's good. But this is the moment when you play queen takes d4, and now there is a difference. They can't play knight c6 anymore, hitting your queen, because now they have to guard this knight on e4. The knight is hanging, and therefore they have to move it back. They're going to usually move it back either to d6 or to f6. Notice that they can't play d5 because once again we attack the square twice, therefore that would just be a blunder of a pawn. Therefore they need to retreat the knight either to d6 or to f6. We'll talk about both these options, starting from knight to d6 where they try to gain a tempo attacking your bishop. However, this is already a decisive mistake, and there is a really beautiful way to punish them for this. Before we dive into this, just a quick announcement. Recently I've created my Twitter account, and there I'll be posting content that is not in the format of YouTube because YouTube is just for videos. Therefore, if you use Twitter, we can now be friends there. Feel free to find the link below this video in the description and get connected. Your opponent at this point was hoping to slow down your attack by attacking this bishop on c4, but we ignore that and we just castle. Their king is very exposed here along the e-file. Moreover, he can't really do anything. He can't develop this bishop trying to castle because that would drop this pawn on g7, therefore that's not really an option. And if they instead play something like knight takes c4 or basically any other move, we then go rook e1. We don't even need to recapture the knight because we're almost about to checkmate him, and after the bishop covers the king, it no longer guards this pawn on g7, therefore we can pick it up and attack the rook in the corner. The rook must move, and after this we have the beautiful way to finalize our attack, bishop to h6. And now we've got this nasty threat of queen takes f8, and black is surprisingly defenseless, even though it is their turn, and although it looks like the bishop guards the rook, but it's not really the case, as the bishop is pinned to the king. Therefore, if they play some random move, then queen takes f8 would actually be a checkmate. And even if they provide this escape path after queen takes, we actually check, the king has to move, and now they're completely devastated. You're up material, you're attacking the knight, obviously their king is dead exposed, and hopefully you're going to win this within a couple of moves. It is much better for black to retrieve this knight to f6, and after that, computer tells you that the position is equal, but in reality, it's really fragile and it's an uphill battle for black. The thing is, this playful pony was horsing around and wasted a lot of time playing back and forth. During this time, you got leading development and you have great attacking opportunities. Black needs to be super precise to avoid a quick disaster. For example, knight c6 is the move they're probably going to play. Then you slide over to the king side with queen to h4. It is putting pressure down this diagonal, as we're also going to put our bishop there. And also down the line, we're putting pressure along the h-file, as we expect him to castle there. They are naturally playing bishop e7, hoping to create some sort of discovered attacks along this diagonal, but it's not going to happen because you play bishop g5, only reinforcing the pressure. By the way, h6 is not an issue because that's not even a threat. The pawn is pinned down to the rook, and therefore you can safely ignore it and just castle queenside. Instead, black will usually castle, and now you can castle queenside. Not only you're putting your king to safety, but also putting this rook to a very active position, putting pressure. Now, they're going to go pawn to d6, trying to develop. If they ever play h6, we're going to sack our bishop right there and finish them off quickly. We'll talk about that in a moment. After d6, which is the most commonly played move, you will actually force them to play h6 by going bishop d3 yourself. And this way, we're teaming up against this pawn on h7. Therefore, the threat would be to eliminate this defender by playing bishop takes the knight, and after that, queen takes h7 mate, which forces them to do something against this move. Now, h6 is the move they are going to play, hoping for you to trade right here. If instead they play pawn g6, although that does not lose the game straight away, but still they're under this massive pressure, and g6 also weakens all these dark squares. You can add the rook to the attack, threatening to capture this bishop and then to capture this knight on f6, and it's actually going to be really tough for them. But also g6 just does not look too good, again, because it creates all these holes around their king. h6 looks more natural. They hope for you to capture here on f6, and they would indeed have a great position after that, but instead you play bishop takes h6. You destroy their king, and after this, it's quite easy to see that it's not going to last long for you to, finish the game. Now, queen h7 is not an option straight away because they've got a knight covering that square. However, you can go knight g5 and then play bishop h7, and black is defenseless. For example, knight b4 is what they play in most cases. You still play knight to g5, threatening bishop to h7 check, and after they trade on d3, they eliminated one of your attacking pieces, but in a way they made it even worse because now your rook is about to be brought to the attack and to checkmate them that way. If they try to block with the bishop, you don't have to remember this line. I mean, from here it's pretty easy to finish it off. I'm just showing you an example variation, right? But when their king is so exposed and you've got your queen nearby, it's natural that you're going to find a way to finish your attack. For example, bishop g6, they're desperately trying to cover, and probably there are a number of ways to finish the game. Knight e6 is the quickest one. We're attacking the queen, we're threatening queen to g7 checkmate. Therefore, they have to take it, but then queen takes g6, and now it's all over. Our battery delivers this checkmate, and we can checkmate in multiple ways again. For example, queen to g7. Just a quick recap, because I understand that there are a lot of variations and it may feel confusing at first, but don't forget that your opponents know nothing at all, and therefore if you just remember even something, you're already far ahead of your opponents. Now, so at this point, after they inaccurately play pawn to e5, you then hit them hard by the bishop c4. Now, OGs know that 3 years ago, I recorded my first video about the bishop's opening, and it is up to this day one of the most popular videos on the channel with millions of views, because the bishop's opening works so effectively. Now, after bishop to c4, we're talking about the fact that knight f6 is the most common move. They're trying to develop, getting ready to castle later, and they attack your pawn. However, you stay cool and you play d4, counter-attacking. We want to counter-attack. Of course, we do not want to defend. Our position is great, and why would we chicken out and try to guard something? Now, after d4, we know that knight takes e4 is a major mistake by black here, putting the knight to this vulnerable spot that you can utilize later, for example, by going queen to d5. Therefore, pawn takes d4 here is the only right move for black. And now you play knight to f3, giving them the option to actually go ahead and capture the second pawn on e4, but overeating is bad for their health, and that is why it's not a good move. Instead, knight to c6 is a better alternative, just playing like really solid. After that, I recommend that you simply castle, getting ready to play rook e1 if necessary on one of the next moves. Now here, the most common move by black is bishop c5, because they see that this pawn is about to be recaptured and they want to guard it as well as to prepare their castling. Now, of course, we can't analyze everything. This is actually the Scotch Gambit. It's another opening. I've got another video about that. I'll drop a link below in case you want to dive deeper into this. But for now, I'll just show you one variation that you can use already to win games in this line. Here you play pawn to e5, attacking the knight, and after the knight goes, there are different ways to go about this. The most aggressive one is bishop takes f7, calling the king out. It's not even a sacrifice, because on the next move, we've got knight to g5 check, which also opens up this discovered attack to their knight, meaning you are going to get your piece back on the next move. They usually go king to g8, then you grab this knight back. Now you're about to continue your attack against this king. They see that this pawn on e5 is undefended, they capture it, hitting your queen. You then slide to the middle and attack the knight, and after they guard it, all of a sudden they're lost. But the variation is kind of unusual. You play queen d5 check, the king must move, and now pawn to f4. Your idea is you want to make them move this knight away to then play queen to f7 checkmate. The fun fact is, The most commonly played move in this position is pawn to c6. They hope for a queen to move away, but once again, we counter-strike. With pawn takes e5. They try to attack your queen, but you say, hey, I'm attacking the king. And the king must move now, leading to queen to f7 checkmate. Alright, now we're approaching the final move that you need to know. So far we were talking about knight f6, their most aggressive option, putting pressure to your pawn. And now we're moving on to the other alternative, knight to c6. But I promise this one is going to be a lot easier. Here there's just one variation and it gives you a simple crushing attack. After knight to c6, we can't play d4 anymore because their pawn and knight are controlling this square. And therefore, we're going to switch it over to something that I like calling an improved version of the King's Gambit. And I'll tell you what that is in a second. We then play pawn to d3, and after knight f6 we also just develop. And notice that we don't play this move knight to f3, and we'll see why in a second. They then play bishop to c5. Again, they play their standard opening moves just like they do in the Italian game, but that is the moment where you turn it into kind of an improved version of the King's Gambit or the Vienna Gambit. And why am I saying that this is an improved version? Well, since you launched this attack on the king side with f4, you're about to have some really nice attacking opportunities. But unlike the King's Gambit, it's not even a gambit. Because in the King's Gambit, when you play pawn to f4 right on the second move, you're actually gambiting this pawn, and then it's not that easy to get it back. But here, it's not even a gambit because you've got the bishop guarding the pawn. Therefore, if they take on f4, you thank them, you recapture with the bishop, they only helped you to develop your bishop, plus they abandon the center, and you have a nice game. Instead, they'll usually play pawn to d6. Now you can play pawn to f5, shutting down the position. You shut down the bishop, making it hard for them to develop it anyhow, down this diagonal. Plus, you see space on the king side, having great opportunities for your future king side attack. Also, bishop g5 is on the way, and it's not easy for black to deal with it. Now, this is one of those deceptive positions where Stockfish tells your opponents that the situation is equal. The reality is, they're about to lose the game within the next couple moves. In most cases, I mean, unless your opponent is like super GM, because it's just very hard for black to find proper moves. For example, if they ever try to go pawn g6, trying to get rid of this annoying pawn and unblock their bishop, you can ignore that and go bishop g5, because now this knight on f6 is even more vulnerable. Their most common move is pawn takes f5, but now after knight to d5, it is time for them to resign and try it again, because now the knight is pinned, and you're about to capture it on the next move. They may try something else. In most cases, they're going to simply cancel, but now after bishop g5, they're left with all the same problems. And again, I think that realistically, we can claim already that it is winning for white here. Now, bishop g5 pins the knight. You're about to go knight to d5, trade off the knight, and expose their king. If they try h6, you can be completely brutal and play pawn h4. It's just a nice thing here. And by the way, it's not even a trap because it's actually a good move because they have no way out of this thing. Now, you're still about to go knight d5 and then destroy their pawn shield around their king and attack. But if they ever capture right here, then it makes the situation even worse for them because now also you've got this file for your rook and you are attacking the knight right here. If the knight goes somewhere, by the way, notice that our queen controls this square, then I can't go forward, but if it goes backward, you then play queen h5, and that is what you actually aim to achieve with this fish and pole trap along the h-file. You want to put up this battery, and now there is like queen h7 or queen h8, depending on what they do, and it's game over. They can't make this escape square for their king by moving their f-pawn, because it is pinned. So it's completely over. And what can they do? If they move the knight, there is like queen to h8 checkmate. I just thought about one more quick quiz for you. What if black tries to prepare this escape for their king by going rook to e8? It is actually checkmate in 3 moves, and your task is to find it and to write it down in comments below. And I know what you may be thinking. Igor, it's all cool, but I'm gonna forget all these variations very quickly. Even if that's the case, of course, you can review this video later, but also let's not forget that the goal is not to know everything. It's just to know a little more than your opponent, and trust me, your opponents probably know nothing about the bishop's opening at all. Also, I've got a free masterclass where I teach how to find proper moves in any openings, and you can access it by clicking the link down below in the description or somewhere on the screen. Apart from that, if you want to know how I went from 1600 to 2260 rating in 1 year, then check out this video.